Osio. This is the Cherokee word for hello. For this UN International Day of Peace during Peace Week, we would like to welcome you and introduce you to a panel of some of the members of our Sunray community. We are all members of the Sunray Meditation Society and Peace Village Land Trust, a spiritual society located in Lincoln, Vermont, and based on the Ywahoo, Cherokee, or Salagi peace villages. We would like to take you on a journey to share how Sunray became a UN NGO of the United Nations and some of the work, past and present, that Sunray is carrying on globally on behalf of Indigenous peoples. Here is a slide. Whoops. Please, next slide. We have two events that we're offering to you this Peace Week, so we hope you'll check out both. Next slide. Next slide. Here is our founder and spiritual director, Venerable Dhyani Ywahoo, with a book she published in 1987. You may remember that she offered the prayers to the fire on the solstice during World Unity Week in 2022 and closing prayers for the 99 Days of Peace. This past June, she led the opening prayers for the World Unity Week New Earth Rising. She also participates with the 22 women offering prayers on the 22nd each month. Today, we would like to give an example of how Venerable's work globally has continued to plant seeds of good cause. One important seed is bringing her Peacekeeper Teachings to Costa Rica. We highly recommend this book if you're curious to learn more about this amazing global peacemaker. Venerable Dhyani is the holder of 3 intact spiritual lineages. She is the 27th lineage holder of the Ywahoo ancestral Wahoo lineage. She also is recognized Tandro, or master teacher of Tibetan Dharma. Venerable Dhyani is also the chief of the Wild Potato Clan of the Eastern Ywahoo Cherokee Band. How did all this come about? How did an Ywahoo Cherokee chief and wisdom keeper end up helping Indigenous peoples in Central and South America? First, let's take a brief tour of her peace village. Then we will introduce you to our panel, all of whom played key roles in bringing this about. Next slide, please. Here we have the clan pole and our Tibetan Buddhist stupa, which are located at the entrance of our Sunray Peace Village to welcome you as you enter. On the right, as you enter, a clan pole greets you. It is carved with symbols of the 7 Cherokee tribes. Venerable Dhyani's Wild Potato Clan is at the top. Clan poles always mark the entrance of Cherokee peace villages. On the left, when you enter, you see our stupa, and you'll see on the slide that they're reversed. Next slide. To give you an idea of the beautiful sacred land within which Dalai Ywahoo is located, here is a view of what is now called Green Mountain Park. Next slide. Here is the entrance to our peace village. If you were to look to your right, you would see that clan pole, and to the left, you would see the peace stupa just after you enter. Next. Here is our octagonal Adawi temple, where we welcome people of all faiths. In addition to Ywahoo altars and Buddhist lineage altars, there are altars of all the major faiths to join us in prayers for peace. A bit of history. These so-called white or peace villages were places of sanctuary for all, even non-natives, until they were forbidden when the United States government took away the rights of Indigenous peoples to their spiritual sovereignty in the 1800s. After these rights were restored in 1978, with the American Indian Religious Freedom Act, Venerable Dhyani Ywahoo, in fulfillment of a prophecy long held by her ancestors and other Indigenous wisdom keepers, established this Ywahoo Cherokee Peace Village known as Odali Utuji, translated as Hope Mountain. It is located in the Green Mountains at the base of sacred Mount Abraham in Lincoln, Vermont, at the watershed of the Appalachian Mountains, where 7 springs rise up and rivers run to the sea. Venerable Dhyani and her grandparents described this sacred land in detail, so that Venerable knew when she saw it that this was indeed the place of prophecy to settle and establish once again an Ywahoo peace village where all are welcome, and as the home fires for these peacekeeper teachings, which include both Ywahoo and Tibetan Buddhist ways of peacemaking. They also prophesied that Venerable would travel the world to bring these teachings where most needed, including going to the House of Micah, which we know as the UN. This indeed did happen, as you will learn from our panelists. Next slide. Here is the beautiful stained glass window of the Vajrayogini that is in the temple. And if you look on the left of the slide, you see a white figure, and actually that is Venerable Dhyani as part of this lineage with the Vajrayogini. And she has braids, and she's actually carrying a crystal, which you can't see. And on the other side is our beautiful white Tara shrine, and the compassionate earth Buddha, Siddhi Garbha, is the statue in front. Next slide. Here's another view of them. Next slide. Here's a slide of our Peace Arbor where we keep the ceremonial cycles and welcome everyone to our monthly new moon fires. In fulfillment of prophecy, we hold our annual elders and youth peace gatherings in person as well as online at the end of July, bringing all together to hear the wisdom of elders, youth, earth and quantum scientists, educators, artists, and musicians. We pray, dance, sing, celebrate, and engage in ceremony together with joy and harmony. We invite you to check out our award-winning documentaries on Vimeo, Peace Village and Passing the Flame, which invite you into this experience. Next slide. Here is where you can find them, and we also will be pasting all these links in the chat for your information. These prophecies foretold, which these films will acquaint you with, that at this time of change on our planet, when things had fallen out of balance, native wisdom keepers from north and south would come together in peace to share their precious wisdom with each other and also with non-natives. Together, this would help bring the peoples of Mother Earth back into balance with her and each other. Women and men would once again respect the divine feminine in partnership with the divine masculine as of old, and live in harmony with respect for Mother Earth and all her children. Venerable Dhyani's great-grandfather, Eli Ywahoo, his daughter Nellie Ywahoo, and her husband Yona Fisher knew that Venerable Dhyani was to carry on the Ywahoo lineage teaching, which are thousands of years old. They began her training when she was a young girl. They also predicted that the Ywahoo people would once again join with their ancient relatives from the East. This happened when Tibetan Buddhist lamas did indeed connect with Sunray in the 80s, leading to Venerable Dhyani being recognized as a Khandro, or master teacher of Tibetan Dharma, in 2 lineages, Drikung Kagyu and Nyingma. From these lineages, Venerable developed her peacekeeper teachings, which are appropriate for everyone. I am Dr. Olivia Cheever. I serve on the Council of Trustees of the Sunray Meditation Society and Peace Village Land Trust. I've been involved with Sunray for many years. Meeting Venerable and continuing to learn and practice her peacekeeper teachings have enriched my life immeasurably. I've also been interested in the UN. My first job after college was with the UN in New York City. So I was most appreciative when Sunray was recognized as a UN NGO in 1992. Since 1969, Venerable Dhyani and Sunray teachers have taught a powerful peacekeeper curriculum all over the globe, including Central and South America, and especially in Costa Rica. For a while, Venerable Dhyani and Sunray teachers would come regularly to teach the peacekeeper there. Then for a few years, this stopped. Recently, due to a series of amazing synchronicities or coincidences, this past March, everything lined up once again to bring the Peacekeeper teachings back to Costa Rica as of this past August, thanks to one of our panelists, Jordi Palu Loverdos. Now, each of our panelists will give us a piece of the history connecting Sunray with Costa Rica, a country of peace and the United Nations. They will share some of Sunray's work at the United Nations for the past 25 years and in Costa Rica. Next slide, please. This is a younger Reverend Margie Joy with Venerable Dhyani back in Costa Rica, probably in the 80s. It is my pleasure now to introduce Reverend Emeritus Margie Joy Walden, who was highly instrumental in Sunray's becoming recognized in 1992 as an NGO or non-governmental organization of the UN. This started with an interfaith gathering in 1989, which many spiritual leaders attended, including the Dalai Lama, and Venerable Dhyani, assisted by Reverend Margie Joy at the University for Peace, established by the UN in 1980, met with world spiritual leaders. This statue, if you show the next slide, is the Dove of Peace, which graces the grounds of the University for Peace to this day. Reverend Margie Joy, please share with us how you came to be assisting Venerable Dhyani in Costa Rica. Thank you. And if you could...
Hello, everyone. It's really good to be here. Thank you, Olivia, for that really good background. I met Venerable Dhyani Ywahoo in 1977 or 1978. It was a long time ago, over 40 years ago. And I was called to Sunray Meditation Society and answered that call. And that began a very long journey of spirituality and a very long journey of working with various groups around the world, promoting human rights and democracy. The people of Costa Rica, the indigenous people of Costa Rica, heard about Dhyani Ywahoo and sent out a call through the ethers to find someone who can help them with certain injustices that they were facing in the 1980s. And I was asked to go on a trip to see what was happening and to help plan for a big conference that was being for all religious leaders together at a very famous basilica in Cartago, Costa Rica. The name of the basilica is the Basilica de Nuestra Señora de los Angeles, the Basilica of the Lady of the Angels. And I arrived in Costa Rica and was shown the places where this big interfaith conference was going to be held. And finally, on arriving at the Basilica, it's a grand building. And it was shared with me that this Basilica was built in 1639 originally, on a site where an indigenous maiden had found a statue of Mother Mary with the Jesus. And she brought that to the local priest. But the most amazing story is out of this rock, waters sprang, waters that were needed. And this was considered a miracle by Indigenous people. And the waters that came from that rock were considered very healing waters. The church and people from Spain arrived in the early 1600s, and by 1639, a basilica was built on this particular site. In the basement of the basilica, there is a mural, and the mural shows the indigenous girl who found this rock and the waters. And when I was taken into the basement to be shown the mural in the basilica, I was really surprised because the mural was a painting of Venerable Dhyani Ywahoo, even though the story happened a long, long, long time ago. So the plans were made. His Holiness the Dalai Lama was invited to the conference. Venerable Dhyani Ywahoo was invited to the conference, along with religious leaders from the Archdiocese of Costa Rica, specifically the Basilica, as well as Muslim leaders, Jewish leaders. Everyone was there. And Venerable Dhyani Ywahoo, when we got there for the conference, which was to include a ceremony at the Basilica as well as a ceremony at the University for Peace. At the Basilica, the day of the ceremony, Dhyani Ywahoo wanted to make sure that the Bribri, the indigenous people of Costa Rica, were included in the interfaith ceremony. And we arrived right before the ceremony was to begin. And she insisted that Porfirio was the name of the Awa, the highest ranking spiritual person of the Bribri at that time, was given a place on the altar in the basilica. And the basilica was really crowded with people. And Dhyani and Porfirio, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, many other religious leaders entered the basilica. There were so many people in the basilica that people were literally climbing the pillars of the church to watch the ceremony. And during that time, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the other religious leaders deferred to Dhyani and the Bribri elder. The Bribri are a small statured people, and the Bribri was sitting on the altar in the big chair, and his feet didn't touch the floor. And he was wearing his high mud boots and a beautiful white shirt because they had come from the Talamanca, the very rural area where the indigenous people lived. And it was very wonderful when Porfirio, the Awa from the Bribri, began his prayer. The light rays came through the windows of the basilica and lit up Porfirio and Venerable Dhyani Ywahoo. And everyone in the basilica was crying because it was the first time that an indigenous spiritual leader was giving prayers on a very old sacred indigenous site. Why was this important? It was important because indigenous people in Costa Rica did not have citizenship in their own country. And there was an organization called CEGETCO, La Voz del Indio de Costa Rica. It was an organization that was formed by Jose Rojas and Jose Carlos Morales to protect the rights of Indigenous people. Indigenous people didn't have citizenship in their own country. Indigenous people had to take on Christian names and couldn't keep their Indigenous names. And so Sunray Meditation Society, under the direction of Venerable Dhyani Ywahoo, we worked really hard to ensure that Indigenous people were given citizenship in their own country. And under the presidency of Oscar Arias, this came to pass. And this was a huge accomplishment for Sunray. The organization Sehetco, La Voz del Indio de Costa Rica, was the organization that brought together all Indigenous people from all across Central America, from Panama all the way to Guatemala. And we had a chance to meet and work with Indigenous people and their interests and the needs for their rights all throughout Central America. And Costa Rica was the meeting ground for this work to happen and continue. And Sehetco became an NGO at the United Nations. And I was humbly asked to represent Sehetco at the United Nations. And this opened the doorway for the International Year of Indigenous Peoples to be named by the United Nations. And in 1992, when that year was over and the International Decade of Indigenous Peoples came to pass, Sunray Meditation Society also became an NGO at the United Nations. Let's go back to Costa Rica. After the ceremonies in the Basilica, Dhyani, Porfirio, and a lot of the Indigenous people were invited to the University for Peace to have a ceremony. At that time, there was an organizer of the conference. He was very set in his ways and liked to do things by the book. We all arrived at the University for Peace, and we were asked to make the ceremony at the back end of the University of Peace campus. And this was not acceptable. We wanted to be in the front and the center of where all the people were. It really felt very discriminatory that we were being asked to go, so to speak, to the back of the bus. And so there were some negotiations. There were negotiations made about where the ceremonies would be held. And it was very interesting because as the organizer was spoken to and we shared our feelings, a large eagle came out of the sky and swooped down over this man's head with its talons flared and screeched the loudest screech I have ever seen. Venerable Dhyani Ywahoo and the Indigenous leaders with her there from Costa Rica didn't need to say a word. The eagle spoke for them. And the ceremony now was moved to the main area at the University for Peace. The ceremony continued, and the Indigenous people and Dhyani sang and danced and made offerings to all the land and the spirit, and really demonstrated for the people how we are all connected and everything is connected. And as the ceremony was going on, in the sky appeared hundreds and hundreds of birds circling around. And it was really interesting because we all saw it. We were astounded. And the birds were never captured in photographs. So it was an amazing day. witnessing miracles as well as spiritual acknowledgement that human rights, acceptance of all people is critical on the path of us as the human race to go forward. This was in the 1980s and into the early 1990s. Here we are, almost 40 years later, and we are still dancing. We are still having to sing the song of peace. We are still asking for discrimination practices to be ended. We're still fighting for human rights, women's rights, people of all nations' rights. And so we continue and we carry on. In 1992, when Sunray became an NGO recognized by the United Nations, the work that I was doing took me to the East, took me to an area that was also seeking democracy, the country of Taiwan. And Reverend Sandy Sheridan took over the work at the UN, and she will share with you the more recent things that have happened. So today I just shared with you a very brief history. I hope that it covers some of the early beginnings, and I'm very happy to have shared that. So thank you all. If there are any other questions or thoughts that you would like me to add, I'd be happy to do so.
Thank you, Reverend Margie Joy. What an extraordinary story, and so beautiful to lay the groundwork for what Reverend Sandy Sheridan is carrying on now at the UN. Thanks to you and to Venerable for your efforts back in the 80s and 90s. It is my pleasure, next slide, to introduce Reverend Sandy Sheridan, whom you have just heard, is our representative at the United Nations in New York City, advocating for Indigenous peoples' rights for over 25 years. And I'm going to turn it over to you. And thank you so much, Reverend Margie Joy. Reverend Sandy, how did this, what happens now at the UN with Sunray UNGO?
Greetings, everyone. It's so nice to be here. And thank you so much, Reverend Margie Joy, for telling the story of how it began, how Sunray NGO began. It's truly remarkable. As you heard, we are at the United Nations because of that, because of Venerable Dhyani Ywahoo, because of Reverend Margie Joy and others who brought this together. Our work at the United Nations involves the NGO Committee on the Rights of Indigenous People. Carolyn DiCarlo and myself are the representatives. The NGO Committee it's an Indigenous forum. It's a place for Indigenous peoples to express themselves, to get together, to advocate for their rights in the UN system. Just a few things. Indigenous people have been guardians of our planet to benefit humanity for thousands of years. Forests managed by Indigenous peoples store 38 billion tons of carbon, balancing the CO2 emissions in 2013. It is their right to have basic human rights of peace of mind, security over their lands, territories, and resources. And as we know, this has historically often not been the case. The United Nations is a nexus point. It's a place where Indigenous people from all over the world can connect internationally. So you see Indigenous people at the United Nations, you see the diversity of culture, the diversity of peoples. And this is who we are working with, thanks to the Peacekeeper Teachings, a map a global map of indigenous people. Now, it's estimated there are between 370 to 500 million indigenous people around the world. That makes up 6.2% of the population, which would be the whole population of South America. Indigenous people are everywhere, all over, from the Arctic, the South Pacific. Just some examples of indigenous people in the United States and Turtle Island, as you know. There's the Lakota, the Wampanoag, the Cherokee, the Navajo. There's the Taino of the Caribbean, the Maya in Guatemala, the Aymara in Bolivia, the Inuit and the Aleutians of the circumpolar region, the Aborigines and the Torres Strait Islanders of Australia, and the Maori of New Zealand, just to name a very few. They all have a special relationship with their land, and they all hold diverse ideas about development based on their own cultures, their own values, and their own visions. And I want to say something here just to clarify and make sure that it's understood that as Sunray NGO, we take our cues from indigenous people. We take our directives from indigenous people. We don't speak for indigenous people. We find places that allow indigenous voices to be heard, particularly in the UN system. One of the big events of the year is the UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. It's held every year in the spring, where indigenous people from all over the world come, they get together, they can speak about their problems. It's in the UN system, it's considered an expert body within the Economic and Social Council, and it has a mandate to provide assistance for indigenous issues into the UN system. So to share about indigenous issues into UN agencies, to different funds and different programs within the UN system. It's also to raise awareness about indigenous issues and to promote the integration, the coordination of activities relating to indigenous issues, and especially with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The Permanent Forum is one of the largest gatherings with over 1,000 participants. It has gained increasing recognition and with an impact on global platform for dialogue, cooperation, and concrete action with indigenous peoples. Now, one thing that I've really noticed, and I've attended the Permanent Forum since the beginning, which is about 22 years, is indigenous people, not only are they able to come forward and speak to the United Nations, and the people that attend the Permanent Forum are indigenous organizations, UN agencies, governments of countries, and NGOs. So their voices are heard by many people. But the other thing, that's on a formal basis, but on an informal basis, what I've really noticed is most valuable is they get to talk to each other. This is one place where indigenous people from all over the world can come together and be able to talk to each other about their situation so they can share. You know, you can hear about the extractive industries in South America. Well, the extractive industries are a big problem in Indonesia also. So these people can share what's going on. They can share ideas of how, what's worked for them. This is another picture of a Native American chief. So on the NGO committee, just briefly, what do? We work on policy. Again, we're in the UN system, which is so much about policy. General advocacy, working for some kind of political balance. We write letters to heads of state, to the Pope, things like that. Mainly, it's really about education. We really bring indigenous people to the international community, to the UN system, to share about their life and their experiences and what they're looking for and what works for them. seeing the reality of their lives directly is, it's really challenging. It's difficult to hear the heart-wrenching situations that Indigenous people are enduring around the planet, and what to do for them or with them. As I said, education is very significant for the NGO committee, and just bringing people together is significant. What we do, again, there are side events, particularly at the Permanent Forum on Indigenous issues. We do side events, say, at the Commission on the Status of Women, other UN commissions. We have an Indigenous Health Subcommittee, which has been very active lately, working on educating people about Indigenous ways of health. We support in any ways we can Indigenous tribes or nations that are being persecuted. We work on upholding the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in whatever way is possible. And we provide a forum for Indigenous peoples. Now, as a Sunray Peacekeeper, we have many principles, and I just want to go through a few of them here. These are Sunray Peacekeeper principles. One of them is mindfulness, the ability to see things as they are and to be fully present in the moment. Now, this sounds easy, but it's really difficult. It's really a challenge. It's really a process to see things as they are. So it takes meditation practices, activities to be able to clear your mind so that you really see things as they are. Peacekeeper consciousness is recognition of one's ability and power to manifest peace through the right relationship with all the family of life. So really taking responsibility for peace and manifesting peace, which is part also of caretaker mind. It's a privilege and a duty to serve as a caretaker of Mother Earth. Honoring Mother Earth as a living being and sowing seeds of abundance and harmony unto 7 generations. Native American and other Indigenous people have been doing this and live by this. Number 4, continuity of mind. Understanding cause and effect in determining the qualities of one's life, death, and future lives, and in shaping the karma of groups, nations, and planets. So through practices, through peacekeeper trainings, through meditation, beginning to understand how your thoughts, your words, your actions affect what is happening in your world and on the planet, and helping to shape that for peace. One of the most significant instruments now is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's the most comprehensive at this point in time. It's a universal framework for the minimum standards for survival, dignity, and well-being of Indigenous peoples around the world. It elaborates on existing human rights mechanisms. It was passed by the UN General Assembly in 2007. So it has been around and it is being used extensively, particularly in supporting Indigenous rights like land rights for Indigenous peoples throughout the world. And just to say, when it was passed in 2007, there were 4 countries that voted against it at that point in time. And those 4 countries were the United States, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Now, since that time, with the change of leadership in those countries, it has been accepted by those countries. As I said, one of the, here, let's see, this is one of the articles of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, Article 5. Indigenous people have the right to maintain and strengthen their distinct political, legal, economic, social, and cultural institutions while retaining their right to participate fully, if they so choose, in the political, economic, and cultural life of the state. That's Article 5 on the Declaration. And as I said, we do side events for the Permanent Forum and other commissions within the United Nations. We recently did the side event on plants, Indigenous worldviews on plants, human and planetary health. This was at the Permanent Forum in April. We had Indigenous people from around the world. We had a woman from the Shinnecock Nation in Long Island. We had a man from the Yankton Sioux Tribe in North Dakota, who is the executive director of the American Indian Community House in New York City. We had a Catholic father who is of the Kadia tribe in India, in Orissa, India. He's head of the Tribal Cultural and Resource Center in Orissa, India. And we had a doctor from Colombia. So we had South America represented also. We try to bring in voices all around the planet as much as possible. Earlier on last year, we did a side event on Indigenous healing ways for mental health, where we brought young Indigenous people who were working in this field to share about their experiences as really living in two worlds. So their traditional Indigenous ways and ceremonies and processes, as well as being in the more established world that we know of. Several of the people were from North America or Turtle Island, and we were fortunate to have a young woman from Nagaland in India who shared wonderfully about the culture and the Indigenous people there. Now, to finish up, the United Nations is one forum on the planet where all countries have the opportunity to speak to one another. It's a forum for collective and collaborative communication. The United Nations is hardly a perfect system, but it's what's available to connect people, to connect voices and people around the planet. We're grateful to Venerable Dhyani Ywahoo, Reverend Margie Joy Walden, and others who began this international work in Costa Rica. We're grateful for Venerable's ancestors, for the vision, for the fire of wisdom, for being able to see the possibilities, for the compassion and the skillful action that has allowed Sunray to be involved with the United Nations as an NGO for the past 31 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Sandy. How wonderful to hear with both you and Reverend Margie Joy how Sunray has built this incredible way to continue what was started in Costa Rica and to expand it to the Indigenous Forum at the United Nations. Thank you so much. Now, I'd like to introduce Jordi Palo-Loverdos, who is a member of Sunray's White Horse Aduji Society, which is made up of international lawyers and mediators. And Jordi just returned in August from once again bringing Sunray Peacekeeper Teachings, as well as his own important work, which he will tell you about, to Costa Rica. And he just got back this past August. Jordi, while you begin to share, I'm going to stop my video and put on your photos, okay? And then you can narrate for us. Thank you. I'll be right back. So please start. Don't wait for me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Olivia. Thank you, Reverend Margie Joy and Sandy and Sheridan. And thank you to Venerable Dhyani and all the Sunray family that made possible again to reweave all these teachings all around the Americas and worldwide. These original teachings that come from long ago, and we continue to learn and to practice and to bring and offer inner and external peace in all directions and all relatives. In fact, I would like to also to thank very especially Miss Eleanor, which was present also in meetings in Costa Rica, in the Basilica that Margie Joy has mentioned previously with Venerable Dhyani, and is the main responsible of the spiritual center of Minifundo in Costa Rica, in the sacred valley of Orosi, that made also possible these bridging previous meetings between Olivia and also Rosemary and many other people. So I was so grateful and honored to have the opportunity to share the peacekeeping, the peacekeeper teachings and the Salmon teachings of Venerable Dhyani, of Joe Washington, and many other elders in a very special land as Costa Rica. As it was mentioned before, in fact, Costa Rica, as you know, is like a bridge of the Americas and of the peoples, the indigenous peoples in all the Americas. And we know that people from the south and the north meet in the center in this beautiful bridge. And with the continuation of what Margie Joy and Venerable Dhyani started, as Margie Joy has beautifully shared previously, we had mainly three, let's say, public celebrations and events. The first was focused on the Salmon Way teachings. Maybe you will see the little altar that we built for this beautiful meeting, where we could see not only, let's say, the principal elements of the altar that we share in our celebrations, but the voice of our ancestors book was present there, and Salmon, like Salmon in the Water book, was also present there, together with all these elements. So we made present all the Sunray family, all the Ywahoo lineage elders that were present at that moment. And in fact, we made present this energy that Venerable Dhyani shared in this beautiful book, saying very clearly that in these present times, for making peace, it's not possible to make that alone. And we need to do that in group. We need to do that in community. Of course, the United Nations is a special manifestation of that. In Costa Rica and in many other places around the world, but especially also in Costa Rica, we were aware at what level the United Nations currently there is still this challenge of people and groups really involved at high level to bring peace all around the world, and also some interests, international and national interests, that this is not accomplished. So this challenge is something that probably, with these words of Venerable Dhyani, making that so present, we need to commit ourselves in group. You see here, for instance, this was something that we did previously in Costa Rica. As a firekeeper, we brought during the solstice this ceremony from the Ywahoo lineage and the Cherokee teachings, claiming for peace all around the world. In the Salmon teachings, we also brought all this knowledge of this circular trip and journey that we are on, and this challenge of doing this journey together. It's like swimming and jumping and leaping upstream with, of course, many obstacles in the road, but with the determination of fulfilling our true nature, as Margie, Joy, and Sandy Sheridan have shared. See things are as they are, so to recognize our true nature of peace and bring that nature with the energy of all, let's say, the peoples. As salmon, they transform themselves in the journey, and they have this determination of to go to the source and to go back home in group, holding the teachings and the learnings of generations and generations that have pursued this journey for eons. So this was a very deep spiritual sharing between the peoples, and sometimes we remind ourselves of the true movement of the Salmons together. And we say the Salmons, they don't ask themselves if they will be able to go back home and to go upstream through all these obstacles. They just do it. And they just are aware of this power of truth, of equity, to do that together, and to bring inner peace in the outer world, and to balance this harmony that is in our true nature. We aligned to the celebrations that were previously shared in the 80s in the International University for Peace of the United Nations in Costa Rica. We did 2 public events in the University UNED of Costa Rica with people present of many sources and diversities and peoples all around the world. And there were also 30 students coming from a very special place where violence takes place every day in their lives. All these students were committed as peace actors in their school, and we shared also about the Mr. Lipton's metaphor about the transformation of the butterfly and how this transformation takes place in another being that is not apparently in the origin a beautiful butterfly. So we are like invited as the microsystems of this worm to be aware of our true nature, to work together for equity and balance in our societies, to transform violence, being aware of what we cause, as Sandy was saying, and be aware of the origin of our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions, both at individual and collective level, so that violence is transformed into peace, hate into compassion, and many other transformations that we are able to perform in our daily lives. And so this is not only an individual commitment, but a collective commitment. And we were aware at some level at how in media, TV, and also social media, we see many manifestations of this violence and some despair of people right now. We see wars, we see violence, we see illness, we see many unbalanced situations. And this is sometimes what is seen in all this media. But at the same time, we were aware, and we are aware, and we need to be continuously aware of many other situations and many other peoples that are committed to being by the people and with the people and working with the people to transform situations of injustice, to transform situations of systematic violation of human rights, indigenous peoples and not indigenous peoples all around the globe. Of course, there are many interests and many also groups shown as states, powers, multinationals, and huge corporations that perform in an unbalanced way and even causing harm. But at the same time, we were sharing of the real power of the salmons working together, or the microsystems of the butterfly being aware of the true nature to transform at a collective level of this situation. And we were also finishing with that at the Basilica in a very intimate meeting, and we could see in the ceiling of the Basilica a beautiful image that was in fact connected with the natural temple of the Bribri. When we visited in Talamanca the Bribri families and the Bribri people. So maybe I want to focus in a symbolic movement that we made. In fact, I offered the Salmon teachings and the Salmon book to Mr. Fausto, which was the elder that received us, to Maritza, to Renata, to Manuela, coming from Minifundo. And as I had the opportunity to share with this elder and also his grandsons, I spoke as a Spanish citizen, saying my regret of what my ancestors did in the past with indigenous peoples in all the Americas, and bringing back the original teachings of the indigenous peoples through the Salmon teachings to the way of where the source came from. So, in fact, that was a very symbolic reparation in the way that Venerable Dhyani did also years ago with the Queen of with the Queen of Spain. So, in fact, that was also a fraternal meeting, embracing each other and recognizing the real value of life, of love, of solidarity, of learning one from each other, of bringing us the opportunity to experiment love and to continue to learn from the powerful life force that is present everywhere, and of course, very especially in Costa Rica at that point. This meeting was at the temple of the Bribri, and I was looking at the ceiling, and I saw 8 pillars and 3 circles going up to the sky. And I did the same movement in the basilica, and I discovered in the ceiling 8 pillars again, and a beautiful star, which of course we can identify with mother, mother with capital letters that could be Mother Mary or Mother Earth or Mother Moon or Mother Sky. So again, all these connections gives us the opportunity to recognize our true family connections from the origins, and to reweave again the family relations and the love that we have the opportunity every day to share with ourselves and with our neighbors and with all the planet all together, as we do through the initiative of being in peace that we started 3 years ago, according to the Venerable Dhyani and the Ywahoo lineage teachings. So we are so grateful that we, again, we continue to learn and to share and to embrace ourselves in these lifetimes. Grateful to all.
Thank you, Jordi. Would you like me to show the photos that you took that are so beautiful now that you've laid the groundwork?
Of course.
Take us on a journey. Would that be
Yes.
okay?
Of course.
So this is starting out with your beautiful photos of Costa Rica. So I'm just going, you tell me when to bring the slide forward and I'll advance it, okay?
Okay.
Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, this is the beautiful nature that we saw there, the mountains, the beautiful volcano, which is still alive, the Irazu volcano. You can follow the next slide. Well, this is connected. This is in the Pyrenees, in fact. This is a river in the Pyrenees. Okay. In the Pyrenees, yes. now we'll see some nature manifestations. Yeah, you can follow different and this is the manifestation of after doing the dance of the directions in the garden in the minifundo.
Which is one of the practices of the Peacekeeper Teachings, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
that
Yes.
we do, right.
So we can see here new life coming. Yeah, next slide. Again, we also visited a river which was previously visited by Dhyani Ywahoo from the Tibetan house in Barcelona, and we were by Azard in the same stone, seated in the same stone, and we saw their beautiful, beautiful butterflies, morpho blue butterflies. Yeah. So here you see this was the preparation of the space. We see a fishbowl, and that was the beginning of the Salmon Way teachings, and that was beautiful. We see feathers there, and we see the altar. And just in front of me, we can see very little the book of Venerable Dhyani and making present Venerable Dhyani and all the elders at that meeting. We can see here Rosemary, which was preaching together with Olivia, making possible this beautiful connection, connecting through meditation in international spaces. So she was, of course, present in the Salmon Way teachings. Here we see also Miss Eleanor and the other participants, Manuela and other participants of the Salmon Way. We were like 25, 26 people sharing intensively. Some of the participants were also native from indigenous peoples from Costa Rica and from other origins. So we can see here while we were doing the Salmon Way. Maybe, yes, you can point at this. Yes, here we can see the altar with the light, the sweet grass, the crystal, the corn, water, and salt, the elements in the altar. And at the center, we see, as we were saying, Venerable Dhyani and all the elders present together. Yes, and this image was placed just there in this room, and we see this beautiful angel of equity with the balance, holding the balance, not with a sword in the middle as justice does, but with the stars holding in the left hand. So it's a beautiful image of the new being. This is the daughter of the justice, in fact, which is a more evolution that the justice, bringing equity in many places. Here we can see the temple.
Sorry.
Yeah, the temple, and this is also symbolic because the fruits were brought to one shore from another. And the temple, this is the temple that I mentioned before, that is built by 8 pillars and the 3, in fact 4 circular wooden structures until the top. I think Margie Joy was with Venerable present in this type of temple. So and in fact, it is important to know that this was rebuilt after a previous temple was burned intentionally. So the father of Fausto had the determination to rebuild it again according to the original teachings that they received. And in the next slide, we see the elder Fausto. This was us embracing each other. We see the Salmon teachings going back home, literally. And so this was the embrace with the elder. And we see that he was talking in Bribri, and her wife was making the translation into Spanish. I was given the opportunity to play the drum, the traditional drum of the Bribri, and I played the rhythms that we celebrate in the arbor that Olivia was mentioning before. Maybe we can see here again the temple, and the following one we can see this is the traditional, yes, you can point this one, the traditional food that was offered to us in these beautiful leaves, natural leaves. This was a beautiful offering that we received. Now we can see the following slide. This was the basilica, and we can see the ceiling. This is the ceiling of the basilica, the wooden structure, and at the top of the ceiling we see these 8 pillars with 8 sources of light, and in the center we see like a star or an illuminant being expanding light from the center in all directions.
Jordy, I just wanted to ask Margie Joy, if this was the basilica where the light came down and shone on Venerable Dhyani and Porfirio, the Bribri elder, is that not right?
Yeah, you can see the windows behind Jordy's head there, and the light came through those windows, and shafts of light shone down on Dhyani and Porfirio from those windows in the basilica.
Wow. Time is a river. It's all happening at once.
That's
And
correct.
the traditional temple of the Bribri, we slept in the temple. Yeah, we slept in there. It was a great honor. We had meetings there. People came from all over the area. And the meetings were long because people spoke in Bribri. It was translated to Spanish and then to English. And then from English to Spanish to Bribri. And so the meetings went really long time, and everyone just sat quietly and listened. And when night came, the fire burned inside the temple here, and we slept in the temple. So it was very protective and extreme honor to be welcomed.
Yes, and for you, Jordy, to be welcomed so many years later is so wonderful, both of you, for doing that. I have a couple more slides, Jordy, that I'm going to show, and maybe you can explain this one.
This was an offering of these. I collect that in the Atlantic Sea in Puerto Viejo near Talamanca after being welcomed in the Bribri family, and I offered those beautiful spirals in the Irazu volcano. So they are. So weaving and connecting all these beautiful nature together.
Beautiful. And I also have a slide here. Could you explain a little bit of that?
Yeah, that was the sharing in the university, hosted by the dean of the university and with the support of the Holistic Center for International Peace, Healing, and Ecosystem. This organization named CHIPSA, and this is the place where a great peace maker, a woman called Celina, was honored by her commitment to peace in Costa Rica and elsewhere. And it was very, very beautiful to honor the words. In fact, she was very wise, saying, yes, our country, Costa Rica, has abolished the army, but there's still so many weapons and so many violence that we need to transform into peace. So we have a lot of work still to do. Being aware of also the opportunities of Costa Rica of reaching peace through all the Americas.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about this.
That was also funny. We found that in the place that I collected the spirals, and since in fact, I can share that. According to your introduction, I was initiated by Venerable Dhyani as a white horse Gaduji member. I asked, that was a beautiful meeting between two white horses.
That's so beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that slide. And then we have this beautiful slide.
Yeah, so beautiful. No words are needed. We see the life force so beautifully all around, and it's so special, so special.
And this is the last slide. Can you tell us about this, Margie Joy?
This was one of our first visits to Costa Rica. I'm there on the left, Venerable Dhyani Ywahoo and her son Tatanka Churu. And on the right is Reverend Dr. Louise Diamond. We were taken to Talamanca. Was one of the first times that we met with the entire community of Indigenous people, where many of them live up in Talamanca, which is on the border of Costa Rica and Panama. And this is where we stayed and we shared, and this is where all the translations and the concerns of the Indigenous people were shared. And this is where the plan was laid out for Sehetco, La Voz del Indio de Costa Rica, to become an NGO at the United Nations, and also to serve as a representative body for all the indigenous people from Central America. And that vision from that meeting, from that time that we went to Costa Rica, that vision was made manifest over the next years. And that is also what brought us to the International Year of Indigenous Peoples, to our work in the UN, to helping Indigenous people in Costa Rica get citizenship, to address many of the Indigenous people's concerns throughout the land, and their land being taken. There was some real interesting things that were going on at the time. Costa Rica had an organization called InBio, and the people from InBio were coming to Indigenous people and asking them to share with them the many plants of the rainforest and their healing properties. And the Indigenous people were sharing their innate knowledge of the plants, and they were not being compensated for that information at all. And so there was a lot of discussion about how that could be corrected as well. There were many things. This was the first step. This picture is a memory of the first step that led us to where we are today, to Reverend Sandy Sheridan's work, to Jordy's work, to the ongoing participation of recognizing the need for continual support and care for rights of all peoples on the planet, especially Indigenous people who have some really innate old knowledge of how we need to be in relationship. As we continue along this path, as we witness climate change, as we witness great storms, as we witness more hurricanes, the warming of the oceans, the temperatures rising, where I am now in North Carolina, to 100 degrees today, we really need to look back. We really need to begin to hear the voices of people who understand our interconnectedness with the earth and with each other, and how every action, every thought, every word, and every deed that we do each day has ramifications and vibrations for the whole planet. It is time. We're being called to awaken. We don't have more time to waste. The last 40 years have passed. I won't be here for another 40 years. So I'm calling on all the young people to wake up and to think correctly and to step forward and make our dreams, our visions a true reality. Tatanka True, we're calling on you. It is so.
It is so. Oh, thank you so much, Reverend Margie Joy, for all you started with Venerable Dhyani and Reverend Dr. Louise Diamond, and so many of our wonderful Costa Rican relatives. We are all relatives in this dance of life. And you and Jordy and Reverend Sandy remind us of that. And I am grateful for my small part, because had my granddaughter not been doing a GAP program in Costa Rica, I would not have gone there. And Rosemary and I would not have organized a way to bring a reunion on Zoom of Venerable Dhyani and Eleanor, the wonderful organizer back then of the peace gathering and the wonderful founder of the Minifundo Retreat Center that you saw, where Jordy gave his salmon way this past August. I was there with my husband in March with no idea that any of this was going to happen. So I want to invite everyone to pay attention to those coincidences in your life, because see what has unfolded just from going to Costa Rica to see our granddaughter. And may it be so that the young step forward. We're passing the flame, as you said, Reverend Margie Joy, to them. And I'd like to thank so much our panelists, and we have links that we will be making available in the chat. I want to thank our wonderful tech maven behind the scenes, Julie Jeffrey, who helped us make this possible. And most of all, I want to thank Venerable Dhyani Ywahoo and her Wahoo ancestors, Ellie Ywahoo, Nellie Ywahoo, and Yona Fisher, and also the ancestors of Porfirio and the other Bribri, for bringing this circle together. The spiral is continuing, and we are all relatives in the dance of life. Aho. We hope to see you at the Peace Village or in Costa Rica. Thank you so much.
Thank you.